Episode 3 is upon us already. We've made it past episode 1. We've made it past episode 2. And we're now at episode 3. I started last week by talking about some of the stats, and I'm going to go in again at some of the stats of the Rucks, Mauls and Oval Balls podcast. We have reached multiple continents, Rory. We've been downloaded in Denmark.
What?
We've been downloaded in the United Arab Emirates. There's people listening in Australia. There's people listening in America. We are a global phenomenon. And with that very, very understated start, welcome to the Rucks, Mauls and Oval Balls podcast. Insert jingle here. We still don't have a jingle, Rory. We need to fix this.
Jingle TBC.
Jingle TBC. But this is the section that I have earmarked as mundane banter. So have you got any mundane banter for me, Rory?
Well, I played my first game since the new year on Saturday for Westcliffe's second team. We were roundly hosed by Hertford's second team, who scored over 60 points, but we did get 4 tries and we won the scrum. So as far as I'm concerned, it's a victory.
Well, that is positive news. How was the run out? How were the joints and the limbs?
Yeah, I mean, Sunday and Monday, I would say ankles and knees were less than pleased with me. But we're more or less recovered now. Scrapes and bruises notwithstanding. But all things told, it was nice to get back out there and blow a few cobwebs out.
I speak on behalf of the entire Rucks, Mauls and Oval Balls kind of staff. We're all very proud of you, Rory. I'll also point out that is me. I'm very proud of you, Rory. Well done for getting back out there.
I do think of you as staff.
Yeah, well, yeah, it shows. But yes, you've gone one step further than I've been able to in my older years of being able to actually strap the boots, get back out there. So I can't really judge. But yeah, thank you for entertaining me with some gentle, mundane banter. We have an absolute packed show. We're going to talk through a lot that's happened in the rugby world this week, which has been a lot. We're also going to be welcoming our very first ever guest, who is quite relevant to this week's podcast because he's had quite an involvement in the development of a young lad, a player you might have heard of, Rory, called Henry Pollock.
I've heard a few things, yeah.
Heard a couple of things. Yeah. Not just that, he's the head of strength and conditioning at Stowe School, and he's going to be joining us to talk about all things Stowe School, strength and conditioning in school setups, academy rugby, young rugby, and anything else we decide to ask on. And then we'll go on to some more general chit-chat around the Six Nations, Champions Cup, Premiership look ahead, and if we've got time, maybe a few Q&As. So let's move on to, very simply, news in the rugby world this week.
Yeah, a lot going on this week, really. Unsurprising with the Six Nations on the horizon, as every rugby union strives to get its PR out and stories in the paper, and every podcast shamelessly flogs the year's premier rugby event for views, and we are no different.
Let's start off with some of the perhaps less positive news. Anthony Watson retired this week from rugby with immediate effect. Yeah,
a real shame that. I mean, easily one of the most exciting players to have pulled on an England shirt in my lifetime. Genuinely, someone got you up out of your seat. It was when I heard the news and I started thinking about Anthony Watson, the first thing that came to mind was the opening minutes of the semi-final in 2019 against New Zealand, when he makes that break up the right wing, and he skins 4 or 5 Kiwi defenders and gets us right on the front foot. Really, if you've never seen the clip, I'd recommend. I mean, I watched that first phase of play from that semi-final about once a week. It's well worth digging it out. If you haven't seen it, it really showcased a player who was at the absolute top of his ability. And interestingly, when I was perusing the social medias on it, it was actually the clip that was pulled up by a lot of New Zealand commentators, perhaps unsurprisingly.
Yeah.
But it immediately stuck in their mind as a player showing their real qualities at the highest level of the game. So very sad for Anthony to have to retire, only 30 years old. He gave us plenty of big moments in an England shirt, in a Lions shirt, in a Bath shirt, in a Leicester shirt. It's one of those real sad stories in rugby that some players' durability just unfortunately doesn't quite match up to the talent, which is a real shame. But he leaves us with a lot of good memories. I really enjoyed watching him play.
On form, Anthony Watson in his prime would have been in the discussion for most people around kind of best wingers in the world at that time.
Yeah,
certainly
absolutely.
in the discussion. Absolute shame for him to hang up his boots. Hopefully he goes on to something successful in whatever he chooses to do, whether it's in the sport or elsewhere. But it's always a shame, especially considering he is younger than me and he's retiring, having had an incredibly successful career despite being cut relatively short.
That's an interesting point. I've actually got more longevity in the game than Anthony Watson. That's something to think about, isn't it?
I feel the intensity Anthony Watson's games been played at may have been slightly higher.
You weren't playing Hertford Twos at the weekend. You don't know.
You're quite right. I wasn't playing Hertford Twos on the weekend. Perhaps Anthony Watson may want to rethink his decision and do one more run out for Westcliff second, just to be certain that he's achieved everything he can in the sport.
I can probably get him a bench spot.
Well, you heard it here first, Anthony. Okay, moving on. Referees in England have been in the news quite a lot this week. So firstly, Luke Pearce talking about how rugby is too complicated and needs to be simplified to make it more appealing to fans. Let's start with point one. What are your thoughts on Luke Pearce, a rugby referee, coming out and saying the sport is too complicated, we need to simplify, we need to make it more marketable, more appealing?
I think he's got a point. I mean, I think this was really demonstrated in the weekend before his European game, when that was that weird moment when it was in the Bordeaux game, I think it was, when they fly hacked it on. He was seemingly in touch, but because his foot was on the line, but the ball wasn't over the line, technically it counts as still. And it was a law that no one other than that referee was aware of. But it's examples like that where you just think, yeah, we're not helping ourselves by overcomplicating this sport. So I think he's got a point. I'm a bit unsure about this sort of celebrity referee thing and having referees coming on podcasts and making because referees are meant to be facilitators of the game, not arbiters of the game, if you know what I mean. They're there to make sure a game happens, but they're not there to influence the game in that way. So something about a referee coming out and criticising laws, I suppose in one sense they're at the coalface, so you should take their word or take their opinion on board. But part of me does think, should referees really be, I mean, in any sport really, but particularly in this case, should they be voicing these kind of opinions in a public forum? I don't know. I suppose you shouldn't gatekeep these things, but something doesn't sit quite right on that.
Well, first of all, I'd say more than welcome to join us if you'd like Luke Pearce on this podcast. I don't share the exact same opinion as Rory on that one. I think where rugby stands out slightly differently to all other sports, I think, when it comes to referees, is our games are so varied and different, partly because, as you say, a referee's job is to facilitate the game of rugby, but we have laws, not rules, and the referee's role is to interpret those laws themselves, which is why we get some inconsistency, because one referee's interpretation of the law occasionally differs to another, which is why there's always talking points. So, yes, I take your point that should they be in the limelight because they're there to facilitate the game, but the game is not the same without them.
Yes, but I think you've slightly touched on his point there. There's probably too much interpretation,
perhaps
in rugby.
Yeah, that is it.
It doesn't have to be entirely objective, but it should be a slightly more objective exercise, because it can be quite incongruous to fans who are, dare I say, less obsessed with the game than us.
True.
When there's some instances where you're not quite certain why a referee has made the decision he has. That's where I think he's got a point. In terms of marketability, some games can seem pretty impenetrable to a more casual observer, I think.
It's quite common, especially as we come into the Six Nations period of time where we get people watching who don't generally watch rugby as much as, say, we do. The most frequent comment you hear is, I like watching it, but I have no idea what's going on, is generally what a casual, neutral fan would say about the sport, which I guess leads into that problem. Is there a way to fix it overnight?
No, unfortunately, it probably just lends itself to more tinkering in the game, which is bad enough already at the moment, really having to change laws halfway through the season to, I say, placate the Kiwis before Super Rugby Pacific starts. I wouldn't like to suggest that maybe they've got more sway on these things, but maybe they do. But I think you have to strive to simplify the game as much as possible, and I do take his point on that.
How about the role of a TMO? Are you happy with the level of influence, the level of involvement that a TMO has in the game?
It feels like they're a bit too interventionist at the moment. I think the TMO's role should be to support the referee, maybe even just the referee and team. You know, you can maybe include the linesman in that as well. But at the moment, it feels like they're having more of an influence on the game. And I understand that with things like foul play, yes, you need to call that, but it's maybe not necessarily in the referee's eye line. But when a TMO is instrumental in a try being disallowed that the referee is given on the field because they've gone back 3-4 phases and found an infringement to deny the try. Yes, I suppose by the letter of the law, you should disallow that try based on that. But at the same time, it just feels like it's too interventionist. And if we're going to keep the flow of the game, we probably need to minimise that a bit more. So yeah, for my money, I think they're a bit too involved in the matches at the moment.
Moving on to Wayne Barnes, have you seen his open letter that he sent this week? There was that news article posted how he wrote a letter that was going to plunge the RFU further into crisis. He then had to come out and clarify that actually what he'd done was submit an open letter effectively criticising the referees union of publishing a series of inaccurate bits of information in their call for the chief executive to stand down. And it is such a mess, everything that's going on with the RFU. It's really uncomfortable and disconcerting as a fan of English rugby to see all this happening. But there was lots of interesting points in Wayne Barnes' open letter. So have you seen it? If so, what were your thoughts?
I haven't read the whole thing, but I have seen the gist of it. I think this all kind of stems to the problem that there is with the RFU. It's this political body seemingly full of some quite self-interested people who aren't there to advance the sport in England. They're there to, I mean, dare I say, line their own pockets or ensure they get the best perks. You know, the old RFU gravy train, you know, never stop rolling. Wayne Barnes is probably not going to be the man to topple the RFU.
No, if anything, I feel like he's almost not necessarily supporting them, but he's almost putting right a few narratives that are being used to try and topple the RFU. So, for instance, the narrative of the RFU making significant losses over the last 2 World Cup cycles, he's spoken to the RFU finance team and they're saying, we've actually made a £5.4 million profit. So there's a load of facts that have been put out there which are being used as the narrative for why the RFU is failing so badly.
And then we paid it all to the chief executive. The RFU are quite happy to hold themselves up in the East India Club and not come out and be a transparent organisation. They've got to understand that you've got to be open with your communication with the sport, because, you know, nature hates a vacuum. You know, people will fill the vacuum with their own. If you think that the narrative being put out is entirely wrong, you've got to go out and make that case for it. You can apply this to a lot of different things going on in the world at the moment, but when it comes to rugby itself, you can't sit back and just hope that the smoke will blow over. ultimately you've got to get on the front foot. And I think the RFU, there's a lot of things that I think you could probably do if you did a top to bottom review of it. But the first thing I'd want to do is create a much more transparent organisation with the ability for any influencing body to be able to scrutinise the moving parts of it. Because part of this is if the refereeing union is coming out and criticising the RFU, this is like another political problem. The refereeing union is criticising the RFU, the RPA is criticising the RFU, the grassroots clubs are criticising the RFU, and the RFU is doing nothing to get on the front foot about it because they're just assuming that they're all powerful arbiters and they can't be toppled. But the noise is getting very loud, and I can see there being a real reckoning there if they don't go out and start either correcting the record if everyone's wrong. Let's leave room open for that possibility that everyone's wrong and actually the RFU is an extremely well-run organisation, then there's no issues. That possibility does exist, as unlikely as it might seem.
It's a possibility. We have to entertain that it is a possibility. You're quite right. I fear the gap, the lack of openness, the lack of honesty, the lack of transparency is they don't want to open the wardrobe to show what skeletons they have hiding there. That's my fear.
Well, that's the fear. That's the fear, isn't it? That it's worse than we think.
Yes. And then what happens if it is kind of really, really bad and then plunges the whole sports governance into this dark abyss that will just drag the sport down. But yeah.
Well, to be honest, if it's really bad, I say raise it to the ground and start again, frankly. Because actually, at the moment, it doesn't seem like the RFU is fit for purpose. And if it's worse than people think it is, then maybe the best thing to do is to raise the whole thing to the ground and rebuild it with a more modern, open organisation that can actually, take that short-term pain, fine, but move the sport forwards in the long term.
Talking of more modern, open organisations, let's move forward onto the Democratic People's Republic of Front Rows. Talk to us about the latest from the Democratic People's Republic of Front Rows. What news have you got, El Presidente?
We've taken another minister into our midst with the news that Dan Cole is no longer part of the England squad. Not officially retired. He's made that very clear. But where Borthwick doesn't want him, the DPRFR will welcome him with open arms, and I'd like to nominate him for the position of Health Minister because the best ability is availability, and that man has been available since 2010, and he's still available if they need him. He's, what do we get to? Is it 118 caps, 350 odd domestic games, over 5,000 minutes played, 503 tackles made with an 89% success rate. I have to commend your
Statman Dave struck again. So those stats were international rugby only as well. Unfortunately, my statistics gathering that I've been doing don't go back to the Stone Ages, which is where you have to start with Dan Cole's performances in a Leicester shirt.
He was carved from Boulder.
From Boulder, and couldn't agree more. The man is a testament to durability, availability, turning up week in, week out. Sure, he's had his injury problems, but you don't get over 100 caps, go on Lions tours, lift trophies, play that many games without being...
And I think the other thing with Dan Cole is that mental fortitude, because he's had his critics throughout his entire international career. And I'll man up at various points. I've probably been one of them, really, where I thought he wasn't maybe the right man at that time, but he's never not put his hand up, and he will keep coming back even in games where, think back to certain games against South Africa, going back to the old Welsh front row against the likes of Gethin Jenkins. He's had some difficult moments in an England shirt, but he has always come back and tended to come back better. So, I mean, this is the DPRFR lowering the flag to half-mast and saluting one of England's greats as he sails off into podcast and domestic rugby obscurity.
We actually have a question come in for Q&A, but I think this is a good place to ask that question.
Absolutely.
Whilst we're talking Democratic People's Republic of the Front Rows. And it's come in, and it's actually quite a technical question, but I think it helps give an insight as to what is important to props. And the question is, how could I adjust my shoulder and hip alignment during the bind to ensure I'm driving through legs and maintaining a strong, straight back without collapsing or losing my position?
Yeah, so I guess to slightly decode that for those not anointed with scrum technicalities, when the scrum is about to be set, the referee will give us calls crouch, bind, set. So that is crouch, fairly self-explanatory. The whole front row sinks. Bind, so that's when each prop reaches over and binds on their opposing number, and then set is when the scrum comes together. So the question here is, when you get to the bind, this is usually when the shenanigans between props begin, and they start trying to put their opposing number off, trying to put them off balance, and trying to disrupt their set as much as possible. The way that I tend to this, so I play either side of the scrum. Depending on which side I'm on, when I set up, I always set up with my inside foot, so that's the foot closest to the hooker, set for where I think I'll start pushing from. And then my outside foot I'll have set further forward so that when I crouch I can still balance. And then when I go for the bind, once I've bound on, that's when I put my outside foot backwards and I keep that parallel to the inside foot. So that way your hips are square. And if your hips are square, you should be able to get your shoulders square and keep a flat back. So this is where having really good core strength is really important. Don't be fooled when you see a prop for the extra ballast we tend to hold around our midriffs. That's all for show. Underneath it is actually a very powerful and impressive core.
Athletes.
Yeah. If I could shift some of the excess gut, you'd see an absolutely resplendent six pack naturally there.
Naturally.
So what that means, so when you've bound, I tend to go for a long bind. Some players like to go for a short bind on the shoulder. Or
I always prefer the short bind.
Yeah, some people go on the shoulder, or if they're cheating, they'll go on the sleeve so they can pull down their opposing number and get them off balance.
Love doing that.
Personally, I go for a nice long bind and trust that I can maintain my shape, but the power through the legs. Once you've bound, however you want to do it, with either a long or a short bind, you're then putting your outside leg back parallel with the inside leg, keeping yourself as square as possible. And depending on how tall you are, so for those that don't know me, I'm about 6'5" something in that region. So quite tall for your average prop. So what that means is similar to the discussion we had about Joe Hayes last week. I tend to lever out in terms of how I scrummage. So what I'm trying to do is drive my hips to the ground, and then I can chase my legs up underneath and get my knees underneath my navel, so I can then repeat the process. So I tend to start with my knees more or less at right angles to my hips, so I get the initial lever, or slightly further up underneath myself, so that I've got a little bit of extra power in the legs. If you're trying to ensure stability on the bind, firstly you've got to really work on your core strength. I would recommend looking up Garcia Botia, who was an Argentinian prop player for Quins up until last season when I think he retired. He now does PT, where he does a lot of specific scrum exercises. Check him out on Instagram because he's got a lot of really interesting exercises that will help with training that. But so work on your core strength, work on the top of your back as well, so you can beat that wrestle against your opposing number. But make sure as much as possible that your hips are square and straight, and when you sink your knees as low and parallel to the ground as possible, because that will give you maximum power and give you the best chance of getting underneath your opposing number, so you can drive them up and ideally get right underneath them and pop them out the scrum, winning yourself a penalty.
Like our counterpart across the Atlantic Ocean, the President of the Democratic People's Republic of Front Rows has signed his first executive order, and that is how you answer that question, which I'm not going to read out again because it was quite a long question. But for anyone who is listening, who is a prop, was a prop, wants to be a prop, I hope you had your notepad out, because there's some real good advice in there. Definitely take it on board. I also completely agree. I've seen the footage of Garcia Botta's work on social media, and yeah, he talks technicalities. He does some really good drills, so definitely look him up. So all we can say is a massive thank you to El Presidente for sharing his wisdom with us today. And as with all other Q&A, if you have any propping specific questions, please do let us know, get in contact, because the president of the DPRFR is always ready and available to answer propping questions. And with that, I think we will say good night to the DPRFR's government building. We'll shut the doors, we'll lock the doors, and we'll revisit the DPRFR next week, if that's okay with you, Rory.
Tourists always welcome.
Okay, now is a special time for Rucks, Mauls and Oval Balls. We've got our very first guest on the podcast. We're bringing in George Coote, who is the head of strength and conditioning at Stowe School, and the face and brain behind Stowe Performance that you'll see on social media. And he's come to talk to us about all sorts of things. But first of all, we're going to start off with a very, very nice, easy question to start off our conversation for you, George. So what's it like being head of strength and conditioning at a school like Stowe, which have absolutely insane facilities?
Yeah, it's pretty cool. In terms of job opportunities in strength and conditioning, it's certainly one that is, I'd say, fairly new still. You know, probably in the first kind of 10 years of schools like having full-time strength and conditioning coaches. But yeah, I mean, it's amazing. Like, you know, you wake up every day and get to walk in front of the mansion and use the facilities and see the pupils getting to do that as well. Like, yeah, it's there are worse places you can be, definitely.
Yeah, very, very different to my schooling, to say.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's no judgment here. There's no judgment here.
No, not at all. I mean, I was reading the website for the school, because I actually didn't know Stowe School beforehand as one of the, obviously one of the big public schools. So I was just having a little peruse of the facilities that you guys have got, and I was so jealous that we didn't have that when I was at school. I thought that must be amazing for kids to take advantage of that. I mean, you must be able to just give them so many different opportunities just to find something that they excel in, whether it's, you know, obviously this is a rugby podcast, but it looked like you pretty much could facilitate more or less any sport they might show an interest in.
Yeah, we offer a huge number of sports. I mean, we offer a huge number of opportunities in loads of different areas. And like you said, I think what sets schools like Stowe apart is just that opportunity to kind of try your hand at so many different things. So, you know, you've got pupils that are playing rugby from 3 o'clock till, say, 4:30. Then they're going off to be in the choir and do some singing, and then they might go and do some drama, and then they like playing the saxophone, or, you know, like, and you can fit so much into a single day that, you know, that those opportunities are endless, essentially. And it is exactly what you make it, I guess, from an individual's point of view.
It must just be so exciting for them particularly once they can find something they're really passionate about. I think that's such a difference maker for, I mean, any child's development, but I mean, particularly a child that's got a real passion for sport in particular, being that kind of multifaceted athlete. I think I saw Henry Pollock, who also we're talking about it being one of your more famous alumnus, talking this week about his history of playing rugby, but also playing football, cricket, doing triathlons, all that kind of stuff. And, you know, those kind of opportunities build great athletes, don't they?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the things that we talk a lot through like sort of youth athletic development in terms of how we model it, is trying to get kids to play as many different sports as possible. You know, try your hand at like anything, you know, doesn't matter what it is. Like, there's generally always something that you can extract from a sport, and then put into kind of what your main sport is. So if you're a rugby player and you're trying your hand at netball or playing squash or whatever, like it's the hand-to-eye coordination skills that you're getting. It's the little bits and pieces that you might struggle with from a rugby context, but certainly from a different sport, then like is brought to the forefront, and then you're then like able to take that skill and transfer it into the other thing. It's hugely important. It's something I think certainly for any young kind of sportsman or woman who's listening, you know, try and get as many opportunities to play as many different things as possible. Try your hand at different stuff, and you'll get something from it.
So,
convinced.
So if we were talking just generically speaking, and this is probably a bit more rugby focused, but what would be your advice to any kid out there listening, or who are a parent listening, to any child who wants to stand out going through playing rugby through kind of junior age grades? From your perspective as kind of head of S&C, seeing lots of players come through systems, what would be your advice to any player out there who'd want to kind of stand out amongst their peers? From
a specifically rugby perspective, you know, I think from a young age, skill needs to be the main driver. There's a huge amount of differences in individual players. Certainly, you know, if you're going junior, okay, say like under 10 through to maybe like under 14, you know, size it differs, you know, massively when you look at a junior rugby pitch. Yeah. And that's often driven by maturational differences. Yeah. So how soon or how late a pupil goes through kind of puberty, and then, you know, like hormonal changes. And it's great to be the massive 13-year-old that's just hammering through and scoring tries and, you know, the highlight reel essentially. But if you are that person, then it's hugely important to kind of take a step back and think, okay, like I can run through everyone, but do I need to work on my skill set a bit more? Because when everyone catches up with me, that might be the defining factor. And then, you know, on the flip side of that, if you're that smaller player that maybe struggles physically, you know, that's going to be the thing that sets you apart from the rest. So having a really high skill level, and you see it in the professional game now, you know, you got props, you've got second rows, you know, flinging out the back passes and, you know, scoring tries in the corner. And, you know, these big lads they're not just monsters anymore. Like they've got serious handling, they've got depth skill work. It's really incredible to see that evolution of how rugby's changed.
I mean, that is a really obvious shift that I've seen in the time that I've been watching rugby over the last 15, 20 years in terms of the skill level of those kind of positions that weren't really focused on that before. Do you find in your role, and you touched on that kind of the levels of maturation that the kids going through at different time, are you almost having to hold certain people back a little bit on the gym and the strength work and the conditioning work to be like, look, you've already got a lot of this naturally. Actually, you need to be probably out of the weights room and out there with a ball in your hands?
I wouldn't say like we don't stop, or we don't limit sort of strength training in the kind of early maturers, but there's definitely differences in the advice I would give to certain pupils, certainly from 13 onwards. So obviously they join the school at 13. So most of the boys, certainly the rugby lot, kind of haven't really gone through that window yet, or they're just about to. And then you'll see a massive spike in height. And then after that, you see that weight change. So you'll have noticed, or like when you're at school, you know, someone comes back after summer holidays and suddenly they're like a totally different person. You know, they've stacked on the muscle. But from a strength and conditioning point of view, you know, our early stage development is very much kind of developing the basics in terms of feeling confident in the weight room, understanding what the exercises are, understanding a little bit about the jargon, knowing what a good squat looks like, feels like, without a huge amount of weight on the bar, because I don't need a 13-year-old to be super strong. What I need is a 13-year-old who's going to listen, like take on board the lessons they're learning, so that at 16, when suddenly this stuff becomes important, they already have that knowledge and that baseline understanding, so that when they hit that maturational window, so their testosterone goes through the roof, HGH goes up, like they can then stack on some muscle. So I just want to see somebody who's like focused and attentive in the gym, so that further down the line, they can then reap the benefits. That's definitely like the most important thing in terms of youth development, is learn the basics, like take a step back. Don't let your ego like get ahead of you, certainly at like 13, 14, because everyone thinks it's really cool to like throw loads of weight around. But actually, like, if you're able to hold yourself back and just think, this is a long game, then when that eventually becomes something that's going to change your physique and your body composition, that's, you know, like, you'll benefit massively. Massively, definitely.
But does having Henry Pollock in your alumni give the current crop of kids going through the system kind of like, here's evidence of the system working? Like, have you seen a noticeable boost amongst the kids? Like, actually, this performance program works because we have a very real example of it working, and working really well already.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I can't imagine any of them would ever tell me that.
No,
but yeah, it's great. Like, it's wonderful to have someone who's clearly loving everything they're doing. Everything you touch turns to gold. You know, and from a school perspective, you know, that's wonderful to see someone that's joined the school at a young age, kind of found their calling, focused, you know, huge amount of time and effort and energy on that, and is reaping the benefits. You know, that's great. He's no different to that 13-year-old that walks through the door, you know. As you can imagine, like, having him in a maths lesson was presumably pretty difficult, but when he was in the gym and when he was on the rugby pitch, he was, you know, an exceptional talent. He was focused, he was energetic, he was wonderful. Like, he was a great guy to have in the gym. There's a number of factors that kind of helped him along the way. One of which, you know, his own personality, his drive and his determination to kind of be the best, certainly from a rugby perspective. And then there were some other things that, you know, were out of his control, but we're incredibly fortunate, you know, like, we have a very good connection with Saints, you know, like, they're fairly local, you know. He got into the academy at a young age and was kind of nurtured through that. The head of S&C or the head of Academy S&C that was working with Saints at the time used to come to Stowe quite regularly and like supported him and Archie and Ewan. And also there was a number of other rugby players. So, you know, out of that year group, we've got Henry and Archie, who have both done 18s, 20s for England and England A. We've got Will Plessy in the same year group. He's gone to Scarlets and he's been in the Wales under-20 squad, did Wales under-18s as well. Another lad who's in the Scotland under-20 squad, Noah Cowan. Like, you know, and it's great. And they were all like together in the gym, like, and it wasn't a chore. Do you know what I mean? It's not, I've got this program, I've got to go to the local gym on my own. You know, like, they're able to just come, train, turn the music up, like, focus on themselves. It's more of a social thing, that, and that's like just quite fortunate that there was 3 or 4 or 5 of them that all wanted to be professional rugby players and were all willing to put the time and effort in, and kind of all jumped on each other's bandwagons and pushed each other forward and made the hard days like a bit easier. I mean, and it's brilliant to see, and hopefully you'll see a few of those other names like come up through the ranks, you know, maybe follow a slightly more traditional approach to professional rugby, where you know, in the England team at basically 19. But, you know, like improve as time goes on, you know, like do their time as a junior and come good by the time they're 25. And if they focus and stay on that, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if we see some of those names again, like, you know, exceptional talents, like really, really laser focused and driven, and again, like a real pleasure to have had the opportunity to work with, really.
Is it around, there's 250 kids in the rugby program, give or take? How hard is it to do talent identification when you've got that many kids?
Yeah, I mean, talent ID at any age is difficult. I think under 13 is almost, you know, is really tough. Is really tough. So our performance program is made up of all of our sports awards holders.
Right.
So we give sports scholarships, but we also have like academic scholarships that have sport attached to them. So that's called a Roxborough. So basically, like they're gifted academically, but they're also interested in sport as well. So they become part of that. So we have a pool of maybe 20 to 25 pupils when they join at 13 that are entered into the performance program. Obviously, a fair number of them are rugby focused, but we have individual athletes. So, you know, we have 400-meter runners or hockey players, netballers, you know, a whole host of different sports. And that's great from my perspective because I get to learn a bit more about the sports that I'm not maybe as clued up with. So that gives me a kind of a bit of an educational role as well. And then I get to kind of work with all of them. So they all come into that pool and then they kind of filter up. So some of them, you know, maybe don't take their training as seriously because they're not, you know, focused on becoming a professional. They just want to play a good standard of school sport. They want to improve. So as you get towards the top, then I get to work more individually with the ones that kind of have that pathway in mind.
How was it when working? So not that I want to turn this into kind of a Henry Pollock kind of deep dive, but like, was it obvious when working with him that he was going to be this young tyro getting to the top of the sport at such a young age? Like, were there things from a young age that kind of thought, okay, yeah, he's different to everyone else?
I mean, I think he was a good player when he was young. So I was fortunate enough to coach him when he was under 13, so first year at school. So I took that year group, and you know, he was tenacious. He just put his head where other people weren't willing to do it. And like as a back row or as an aspiring back row forward, he was fantastic. And you know, he was hard as nails and just willing to kind of get over the ball and make things happen. I think that certainly came out when we played in our first sevens season, because he was the guy that would just make the hit, make the turnover, and put someone else in space. So he didn't necessarily take all the glory, but like a lot of the hard work went on that. And then we happened to have some quick lads that, you know, give them half an inch of space and suddenly they're gone. So he really kind of stepped up there. So his under 16 year was when we went into COVID for the first time. So we didn't play any rugby that year. Wow. But we still trained and everyone was out training. You know, they just spent 6 months doing skills work. You know, they're not playing rugby. We weren't even allowed to kind of tackle each other or anything like that. COVID time really kind of changed everything, really. But like that year group who were really keen on their rugby sort of took it as an opportunity to be like, right, okay, we'll work on our skills. We'll work on our fitness. We'll do this and that. And like, I think that probably, again, was kind of a fortunate
that's interesting
time. But yeah, he was always a good player. And there was always talk about, you know, certainly when he got into the sixth form, about him being a fantastic player in the future. I mean, it's been a pretty whirlwind 16 months for him, I guess, and I can't imagine it going any better, really.
I wouldn't know what better would look like Henry Pollock at this point. It feels like he's reached the top very quickly.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Yeah, and and I hope the next 6-8 weeks go well for him, and he's able to, either get an opportunity to play, but certainly just spend some time in camp and learn what top flight rugby looks like. Because that again, that must be another step up, and all those opportunities that come. It's a fantastic time, and hopefully he'll flourish, I guess.
You've mentioned some really almost ineffable qualities that Henry had, that kind of dedication, determination. So if you were a kid who wasn't maybe at a school like Stowe, but had that quality or the qualities that someone like Henry has, or someone who's got that kind of aspiration to reach the top, who maybe doesn't have the access to, a strength and conditioning coach at that young age to build those fundamentals with like an independent voice. What would be your kind of top suggestions to a kid, 13, 14, 15, who think, look, I really want to do this, but circumstances dictate I haven't got quite that access. What are the things that they can do off their own back to try and reach those kind of heights?
I guess my advice on that would be, obviously follow my page and look at the stuff that we post about training and like the things you kind of do. I mean, I cover all sports, but I focus a lot on rugby, and I talk about training and the kind of exercises they should be doing. So that's the first point, obviously. The second point would be like, try and just focus on like the basics. So get confident in the weight room, try loads of different things, learn to squat, learn to bench, learn to deadlift, like learn these things, spend some time kind of reading about them or watching YouTube videos or watching whatever it is. But try and like focus yourself on the things that will be important. So there's, this Instagram kind of lifestyle that we live now is like everyone's chasing like that like really jazzy exercise that's going to change their life. Like that doesn't exist. Like I was talking to a pupil today, and my advice to him was like, if you're doing an exercise in the gym that you've seen on Instagram or TikTok or whatever it is, like just stop and think, is Maro Itoja doing this exercise? Because if he's not, it's probably not worth it. And that's a really tough thing, certainly in social media, and something that I've struggled with throughout. That is like, most of this stuff isn't really appealing. People don't want to hear that like you just need to be able to like squat well. You don't need to be able to set the world record for squats. You don't need to be able to like you just need to be able to squat a decent amount of weight, like and do it well and not hurt yourself. Like that's basically it. So learn the basics. There's probably like 20, 25 exercises. If you had 25 exercises in your arsenal and you're able to absolutely nail them and do it consistently for 5 years, then you're not going to go wrong. So that's from like our gym perspective. Get out and sprint. Like sprint 3 times a week, 4 times a week. Like get comfortable, like sprinting to get quicker, but also sprinting to like develop fatigue tolerance. So get out on, none of this costs any money. Just go out and run. Like some of the sessions we promote to the younger lot when they're on holiday and stuff is set a timer, run away from your house for 15 minutes. When the timer goes off, turn around, try and beat it back. So like you're running away for 15 minutes and then you're going to try and do it in 14:30 on the way back. It literally is that simple. What you need is the determination and the consistency of training that's then going to like move you forward. And then it becomes a habit. If you wake up every day and think, okay, what am I doing today? And you go and do some training, like it just becomes habit. If you put it off, if you don't do it, then it becomes something that's like, I should probably do that, but never mind, I won't. Yeah. So you don't need all that, but like fitness, skills work, and being strong, like just being strong, you're going to be less likely to pick up injuries. You're going to be more tolerant to like the load that a lot of young kids go through, which is they play and train a lot, especially if they're playing at school, academy, club, maybe, you need to tolerate that level of intensity. Yeah. So, like there's tons of stuff out there, and be interested and learn and try and pick up as much as you can. But, like this do the simple things well.
I mean, that's really, and those are really, really good, like scalable things that, any kid who wants to, achieve anything in sport, I guess, can go out and do. On slightly attached to that, is there one jazzy Instagram exercise that David and I can do to finally get rid of our guts, or does one not exist?
I do use some jazzy exercises. I don't know whether it's going to get rid of your gut or anything.
They're not miracles. They're not miracle makers then.
No, unfortunately, there is no exercise that is like going to transform your life.
There's no substitute for hard work, is there?
That's a real shame.
Yeah, so, unfortunately, it's just
hard work. Yeah.
Get on it.
So what does the future hold for yourself and Stowe, and kind of what does it look like? What's the plan?
Well, from Stowe Performance perspective, just keep supporting all the athletes that I've got that I work with day in, day out. That's really cool. From a rugby perspective, we've got our quarter final of the under-16s Cup next week. We're playing against a Welsh team, which I'm not going to try and pronounce the name of.
Fair enough.
But yeah, we've got, so our under-16s are in the quarter final of that Cup, and they're an exciting team. They've got some great individuals. They're a great unit, and they're all like laser focused in what they want. So that's exciting. So it'd be good to see them kind of have an opportunity to maybe right some wrongs from last year, and then obviously just leading up to Rosslyn Park, really, which will be pretty cool. And then I get to deal with it. We've got a really good netball team as well, so I get to spend a lot of time with the netball girls. We're off to a tournament tomorrow, actually.
Okay.
By Next Gen, so the guys that do the rugby stuff. So we're at a tournament there, and then hopefully get through to the national finals as well.
That's cool.
Which would be cool. So,
that is cool.
Yeah, busy time.
Yeah, all the luck to the lads in the quarterfinals and to the netball team as well. I hope to hear that they both bring home the trophies.
Fingers crossed. Yeah, it'd be nice to see some more silver.
Absolutely. So, one question we're going to ask every single guest that we have on our podcast for hopefully years to come is, of all time, just who is your favourite rugby player of all time?
Oh, see, you should have given me some warning on this.
We want it off the top of the dome, George.
That's the unfortunate situation of being the first guest ever, because you had no way of knowing.
Do you know what? The guy that absolutely inspired me when I was younger was Matt Dawson.
Great.
Yeah.
So as a fellow scrum half, I just thought he was great. Like I loved the energy on the pitch and like the things he could do, and like the little cheeky things where he kind of, that Lions one where it's like the little
oh yeah, that's so good. Yeah.
It's like little things like that. I think just I have very fond memories of. So yeah, Matt Dawson was definitely one of my favourite players and someone I aspired to be like.
Yeah, iconic player and a great question of sport captain too.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, he just had his triple threat. He had everything.
He did.
Absolutely.
He did.
Absolutely.
George, where can the people find you? Where can they find your programs, your socials, everything else?
Yeah, so everything is on Stowe Performance on Instagram and TikTok. So if you search for that, you should find it, and everything from training programs to like exceptional moments that we've had at Stowe Sport, and some sort of funny videos with interviews as well. So just trying to promote everything that we do here and some of the talent that we have coming through. It's really exciting, and I just want to champion the pupils that we have, that I'm excited to see what they do in the future.
Brilliant.
Yeah, well, we hope to be hearing some of those names ourselves.
Fingers crossed. Yeah.
No, absolutely. No, it's been really, really good having you on. I think we've done very well having you as our first guest ever, and it's been really interesting, really, really good to chat to you. So, yeah, no, just appreciate you coming on and chatting with us.
Thanks very much for your time. It's been really enjoyable.
Thanks, mate. Appreciate it. And best of luck to all the teams.
Well, now we're going to move on. We're going to move on to let's talk Champions Cup, Rory. Obviously, we've just had a weekend of round 4 of the group stage of the Champions Cup. The group stage is all done and dusted now. Everything is settled. We know what's going forward for the future, but let's not ignore what has been a fantastic weekend of rugby with some extraordinary results. We won't go into it game by game by game because we've got an absolutely packed podcast today. But we'll dig into some of the scores, some of the results of some of the performances. Let's look at some of the English teams to start off with. Friday night, Ulster versus Exeter.
Yeah, so this is a strange game, really, because two teams that have struggled all season, Ulster in the URC and Exeter in the Premiership. So it finished Ulster 52, Exeter 24. It was actually 17 all at half time. And it was a bit of a story of Exeter's season in a microcosm, really. They scored a couple of really good tries. Paul Bampo scored another really good try. Ross Vincent scored a phenomenal try.
Phenomenal.
So watch out for him in the Six Nations for Italy. He scored, from playing number 8, he scored a try from about 60 metres out.
Yes.
And rounded the fullback. So he's well worth looking out for. The Exeter defence was so soft, particularly around the fringes, but they were so easy to break down. It was unbelievable. And the second half was, I mean, a really poor showing by them. I'd say, having got themselves into the game, they actually had the opportunity to go through in this.
Yeah.
Ulster have made it through to the next round off the back of one victory, which is a weakness of the European Cup. But Exeter's season in a microcosm, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
Some individual talents, some individual playmakers, but I mean, just so soft players, and it really, really disappointing for them to bow out of this year's Cup with the women, with only 1 point to show for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Exeter's European adventure is done and dusted. They just need to focus on the Premiership and kind of consolidating on what has been a pretty poor season so far. Moving on to what is, for me, perhaps biasly, one of the games of the round, Northampton Saints versus Munster. Saints winning 34-32 in what was an absolute humdinger, nail-biter, back and forth, very even, very competitive game.
Yeah, humdinger's right. That's exactly what I'd have described it as. Northampton were really good, right? But you've got to give the Munster their flowers on this one as well. They really turned up. Their fans really turned up. They really made for a great atmosphere at Franklin's Gardens, really watering down the home support, which is always good to see at Franklin's Gardens.
Shaking my head.
Yeah, I thought this was a good game. Some really standout performers. Conor Murray assisting with a good old-fashioned George Gregan was great.
Not enough of them.
For anyone not anointed, it's when the 9 from the back of the ruck bumps out for a couple of metres and then throws a blind pass behind them to a runner to go through the gap they've left as they've run away. It's very classic, named after the Australian scrum half from the early part of the 2000s. He was a fantastic player himself. Yeah, this was good. I thought Saints were at half time. I put Saints profligate, which probably meant I hadn't had too much to drink by this point because I spelt that right. They didn't capitalise on every opportunity they had. I thought Tommy Freeman was very good though. I thought he had a particularly good game, pretty effective.
Yeah,
Seabrook, the Gloucester alumni, scoring a hat trick was nice to see, but there was only one real difference maker, I thought, in this game in the end, and it's the man that we're all going to talk about endlessly for
we already have
the whole of this tournament. We've already mentioned him. Henry Pollock came on and was fantastic, and he was the difference maker, I thought.
Yeah, so he came on, he got a very crucial turnover. He was on for 21 minutes of rugby and he made 12 tackles in 21 minutes, which, when you look at the best tacklers in the Premiership, for example, the Ethan Kane, who is the most frequent tackler in the Premiership at the moment, does about a tackle every 3.5 minutes. Henry Pollock made 12 tackles in 21 minutes, which means in less than every other minute he's making a tackle in those last 21 minutes. Like, his work rate is unreal.
Yeah, he was everywhere. And he saw the game out for Northampton, as you say, with the tackle and the turnover at the end. I thought he was fantastic.
Yes, absolutely.
And Northampton being the only Premiership team to get themselves a home berth in the next round. So despite maybe a slightly disappointing return to the Premiership for Northampton after winning it last season, they've shown up in Europe and looked really good for it.
Okay, moving on to try and avoid being on a Saints-specific hour. Clermont versus Bristol.
Yeah, Bristol made a good showing of this in the end. And they would probably argue that they could have won this, but this was a game of Clermont power really overshadowing Bristol. The likes of Raka and Yato were pretty indomitable in this game, and pretty emblematic of what I think is an obvious problem with Premiership teams in Europe this season is there's just a real power deficit. We're just not able to cope with these big French teams. And you can probably find 3 or 4 reasons why that is the case. You can look at squad sizes and squad depth, but ultimately we're just not powerful enough as a league, and it's really, really showing up in these games. So Bristol had a strong side, probably the strongest side they had available, more or less, I would think.
Yeah, give or take a few, yeah.
But they again bow out of the competition, having only won one game. Absolutely. For second place team in the Premiership, a really poor return, I thought.
Well, and let's segue that into the first place team, losing to Leinster 47-21.
Yeah, having gone in up at half time, Bath really didn't reappear in the second half. Shafted by the referee, I have to say, with the Benno Abano red card.
It did feel.
I think given a second yellow card. Yeah, given a second yellow card for scrum penalties and sending them off felt like easy fodder for those of us who think Leinster tend to get the rub of the green in these games. But what I would say is Abano was already struggling in that scrum and already given away a few penalties. I think it was a mistake by Johan van Graan not to substitute him earlier because he was clearly struggling. And you were running the risk of this. He probably didn't think the referee would give a second yellow card for scrum penalties, but
he did.
You were running the risk. It's poor management on their part, really. On the positive side, in the first half, Bath defended really, really well. Ollie Lawrence stood out with a really nice assist, outpacing, I think it was James Osborne in the wide channels, showing why 13 is his natural fit.
Agreed.
Tom de Glanfield scored a couple of really good tries. And Ted Hill, in the early moments, gasses Gary Ringrose down Leinster's right wing and flattens the fullback, showcasing what he's really about.
Yeah.
So there were positives for Bath there, but ultimately just outclassed in the end.
And they've got to settle for their next European game being in the Challenge Cup. And probably not where they were hoping to be when they started this tournament, and they'll be ruining that loss against Benetton, I think, because that would have been a real difference maker. But let's go on to maybe a bit more good news for the Premiership sides. Harlequins versus Glasgow, winning 24-7.
This was a good game. I think Glasgow fans have been feeling a bit aggrieved with the referee. You can probably make that argument at least on one occasion for Caden Murley's try. But all round, this was probably the best game I've seen Quins play all season.
Yes,
I think it's up there with their best performance. And a lot of the English players really showing up. So I think Finn Baxter had one of his best games. Went really well in the scrum, really well in the loose. Made a lot of tackles.
I'd like to think we've motivated that performance out of him through our constructive feedback in week 1.
Absolutely, you catch more flies with honey than with vinegar, David. That's the attitude I want to take with all young English props. I thought Oscar Beard and Ben Waghorn in the centres were really good. Waghorn is looking of the right quality. I think he's got a big future ahead of him.
That disallowed try for Waghorn, I thought he looked incredibly powerful.
And he seems to have the whole package for a good 12. So he's definitely one to look out for in the coming months. because I suspect it looks like he's overtaken Anyanwu in that 12 shirt, so hopefully he takes his opportunity. But Oscar Beard as well at 13, very good.
Yeah, absolutely.
On both sides of the ball. Chandler Cunningham himself had his best game for some time, I thought. He looked like he had a bit between his teeth. Again, both sides of the ball, lots of big hits, lots of big carries. So hopefully taking that form into the Six Nations. And Caden Murley is really putting his hand up for a starting spot, I think. I think he's got to be made some serious considerations for that because he looked really, really good. Quins are good because Glasgow had a lot of the ball and they're a good side. I think they're second in the UCR, aren't they? So they are not to be trifled with. They won it last season.
They are not a bad team. Glasgow are not a bad team. Obviously, they've got their injury problems at the moment, which we might touch on in a bit. Well done. Good win for Quins. Let's talk Saracens cast.
Well, this was disappointing for Saracens.
For many reasons.
For many reasons. This was poor from them. I watched the long highlights back today. And the thing that really struck me was something that you rarely say about Saracens. How soft in defence were they? And I'm sorry to call out a couple of the culprits because they are players who are likely to have an impact on England's Six Nations, but Ben Earl and Elliot Daly. But I think particularly Ben Earl, who I think got bounced at least 3 times that I saw, had a bad day at the office. Really didn't show up in defence. And he's not necessarily renowned as he's not Sam Underhill, but he's renowned as a pretty dominant defender. But he was not with it on that day, and so he will need to shape up because there's a lot of people snapping at his heels at the moment. There
is, I completely agree. I was absolutely perplexed when I was watching this. Saracens looked the worst team. I saw the starting lineups and I saw Cast were basically sending a B team, the same team that Northampton dismantled in week 1, but actually even weaker. And just to see them just get out-muscled in so many facets of the game, I was surprised. I put a load of Saracens players into my fantasy team, and boy, I wish I hadn't, because they did not deliver.
No, they didn't.
Saracens they'll come back. They always come back from a loss like this. So watch out on the weekend in the Premiership because they always respond. Perhaps the next game is one that Leicester Tigers fans will not want us to dig too deeply into. A close-fought battle between Toulouse and Tigers ending 80-12, Rory, in the Champions Cup, the elite European competitive tournament where a result is 80 points to 12.
Yeah, a stacked Tigers team as well, packed with international players.
Yes.
They had a double World Cup winning fly half. They had probably Wales' starting loosehead, the Argentinian captain at hooker, an England international tight head, 2 players in the back 5 of the scrum who will probably start for England in Martin and Chesham. Tommy Raffel, good chance of starting for Wales at open side. Jack Van Poorfleet at the scrum half. Parisi in the centres. Ollie Hassel-Collin and Freddie Stewart in the back 3. You would say that is a strong side on paper.
Yeah.
Oh my God, were they outclassed? And do you know the weird thing is? I don't think they played that badly. When they had the ball, they looked quite good. They looked quite good. Toulouse were freaks. They can. At some point, they couldn't stop themselves scoring.
Just another level. It was unreal. So this is why when people always say, "Oh, it's Leinster's year," Toulouse just have this ability to unlock levels of rugby that you rarely see, and we saw it. And it was also, oddly enough, Antoine Dupont wasn't the best player on the park that day for me.
No, Capozzo,
Willis, Ramos, Thibaut Flamand, Miafu, they all stood up and showed that, hey, there's more than one player at Toulouse.
Isn't there just? So, there seems to be about 40 of them.
Yes. And unfortunately for Tigers, they bore the brunt of that losing.
It really took a hammer blow on that one. It was unbelievable. I couldn't believe what I was watching. It was a lot of fun because I'm not a Tigers fan. Yes. So it was a lot of fun to watch. And I've got a real soft spot for Toulouse. But Good God. I mean, by the end of it, it was like, he's already dead. Stop, he's already dead.
Yeah, no mercy was shown at all by Toulouse. And nor should they, because they were clearly having fun. But let's not kick a tiger while it's down. Let's go, let's try and get a bit more upbeat. Sale against Toulon. Probably the most unexpected result of the weekend for me.
Yeah, Sale were good. Sale were really, really good. Rafi Quirk and George Ford showing. I mean, we made this point, I think, a couple of weeks ago. You put those two back in that Sale team, and it's a different beast. They were great. I mean, they were still a bit inaccurate attack, still suffering from some of the same things they had last week away at the Stormers. Were they playing last week?
Yeah.
But generally speaking, they were so much more entertaining to watch. They were great in defence, really dominant Alex Sanderson drilled defence, as you'd expect from them. But some of the attack, I mean, if you've not seen the highlights, I'd implore anyone to go and see Ben Curry's line break, grubber, regather and score. Sort of skill you rarely see from a forward, even at the top level. It was phenomenal. The front row, Bevan Rod and Asher Prokofjord in particular were really great.
Really good.
They've really looked good in the last couple of weeks. I think they're going to be pushing for some more recognition for England over the coming weeks. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. But Sale, great. Really, really stood up in this one. I was really impressed.
Yeah, I really do not have much about. I was going to draw out Bevan Rod and Asher Prokofjord myself. I think those two seem to be really clicking as a pair of props playing together. They complement each other around the park as well. They seem to work well in tandem, and it's working the scrums. That they weren't up against a weak opposition in Toulon at all, and they more than held their own. So really positive from an England perspective. So yeah, well done to Sale, winning 33-7 against Toulon, and actually giving themselves, albeit probably not the draw they wanted in the round of 16. But
bit of a poison chalice, that one.
Yeah, but they've got a nice day out to Toulouse to look forward to.
It'll be lovely weather.
Lovely weather. And I think the only other game, there's a few other good games, but the only game that I think we should touch on, and it's mainly because of one man, Bordeaux versus Sharks.
Yeah, this was an entertaining game to watch. Bordeaux won this 66-12, and I actually thought, in relative terms, they were quite poor probably for their own standards in this game. They were really good in bits, and they tended to score. And fortunately, one man tended to score them.
Yes.
Damien Penaud, 6 tries.
6 tries.
I mean, I've never seen it in top
Champions
level.
Cup. Not Champions Cup for sure. I've not seen. I don't think I've seen it Prem level. I can't remember off the top of my head. I think I've seen 5. I don't think I've seen 6 before.
I mean, ludicrous, and he was just untouchable.
It brings his tally for the tournament up to 10. Second place is 5, so that puts into context how far and above that's put him in the try scoring tables. Coincidentally, with 5 is BLBRA, who, had he been playing, probably would have also scored another 6 or so. So thank God for Sharks that he wasn't playing. But
if you think that last week he threw that 20-metre pass inside when he could have crossed the line, he could have scored 10 tries in 2 weeks.
Yes, scary to think of in that aspect.
Yeah,
and Chris Ashton's Champions Cup record, which I think's 12 tries in a Champions Cup season, very much under threat.
Very under threat, and it should be as a player that good.
Absolutely.
The other thing I think to just draw out of this game for everyone who enjoyed prop physiology chat last week, talking about Joe Hayes. This was a game that really gave you all shapes and sizes in the front row. If you want to look at the two different spectrums of what a modern prop looks like, you had a couple of really good specimens this week in Sadie playing for Bordeaux and Enyakane playing for the Sharks, who were really of the quite, I would say, classical physique of a prop in many ways. In stark contrast to Jefferson Poirot and and apologise if I get the pronunciation, Machuna or Machunu.
Cthulhu Machuna.
Machuna, who were playing Loosehead respectively, who both looked like genuine athletes, as did Danny Priestland when he came for Bordeaux. But a real range of specimens, I thought, on this one.
Well, I felt empowered to ask you to review the physique of the week once I saw Carlu Sadie's thighs on a close up in some of the highlights on the Bordeaux game.
Beautiful thighs.
He is a specimen. I would encourage anyone just to have a little Google image search up of Carlu Sadie of the Bordeaux Begler rugby team, because he is a unit and.
Yeah, that's a drumstick I'd like to have on my plate on Sunday dinner.
You'd eat well, and the dog, the dog will too. There's plenty to go around. Yeah. But yeah, so I think that generally sums up the results from the weekend. So a quick roundup of kind of how the dust has settled and the round of 16 fixtures they're going to look like. And so we've got Toulon versus Saracens, La Rochelle versus Munster, Bordeaux versus Ulster, Toulouse versus Sale Sharks, Leinster versus Harlequins, Castres versus Benetton, Saints versus Clermont, and Glasgow versus Leicester. So yeah, that rounds up the Champions Cup. So that's the round of 16 we've got to look forward to the first weekend of April. So we'll come back to the Champions Cup in due course. But there's a lot of rugby to take place between now and then. There's a small little tournament taking place, one you might have heard of. It's called the Six Nations, Rory. I don't know if you're familiar with it. Let me know if you need an introduction. But that's taking place very, very soon.
Yeah.
And I would like to do some predictions.
Great. Well, it's my favourite time of year. I love the Six Nations. I love everything about it. And I'm really looking forward to this year's tournament. I think it's going to be a good one.
Couldn't agree more. So before we go into our predictions, there's been a couple other bits of news that's come in this week. That's worth playing into your predictions. Scotland-wise, 3 big injuries in Sione Tuipulotu, which is a huge loss for them. Their captain, probably their talisman, their leading man beyond Finn Russell. Scott Cummings in the second row, and Dylan Richardson, kind of their all-round hooker back row option. So 3 big players that they're losing out of. England-wise, Alex Dombran, Alex Coles, Jamie George, Van Portfleet, Alex Mitchell, all pulling out of the squads. So one thing before we get into predictions, one thing I want to kind of draw focus to is the difference in the mood amongst fans is quite interesting. Scottish fans are incredibly downbeat. They're quite dejected almost by these absentees. Whereas the news of the replacements coming in for England, if anything, I think it's given England optimism, hope, and excitement, which is bizarre considering the quality of player that's like we're missing out of. Like Alex Mitchell's on the list.
Well, absolutely. I think England fans like me are incredibly excited to see Arthur Clarke finally get the call up and finally see Gloucester represented in that England squad. And it's given me cause for optimism, and it seems to have done good for the nation.
Jokings aside, I've been calling for Clarke to be looked at for some time, especially
since a really good player.
Especially since his performance in the England A game, where I thought he was a standout player for England A in that game. Yeah. His work rate is unreal. He's actually got a good eye for an attacking line as well. So yeah, very happy with him. Obviously, we've got Henry Pollock, Curtis Langdon coming in from Northampton Saints' perspective, and then we've got Rafi Quirk, your man that you're calling for last week. And Ben Spencer, the other man we were calling for last week, to being brought in as well. So some good news, I think, from an England perspective. So with that kind of in the backdrop, and we're going to do some Six Nation predictions. I know my prediction. I've shared it many times on my TikTok lives and on my posts on social media. I'm keen to know yours, Rory.
So England's outcome in this Six Nation, I think, is really going to come down to how they perform in Dublin, right? That's and it's flippant. It sounds obvious to say that it comes down to that, but in some tournaments you can recover from a bad first performance out the gate, and losing in Dublin is never something to be ashamed of. But I think with this administration, the way they react to defeats has often led to them being more more conservative, at least I feel like in the last few games. So I think a big expansive performance is going to be quite needed. I suspect we will struggle in Dublin, is the honest truth. I think there are questions about the Irish team, particularly not having Andy Farrell there. But my gut says that we probably go down swinging. But as long as we're swinging, I don't necessarily mind it. I'd love to be more optimistic for that one, but yeah, gut feel just tells me that we don't do a job on them in Dublin. And overall, I think this tournament probably the title, for my money, heads back to Paris. Although I think without a Grand Slam.
Well, finally, that's exactly where I've landed. I'm predicting a France win without Grand Slam. So the order that I've kind of predicted in my head, and I'm going to switch my much publicised order because I think the Scottish injuries are more impactful than anything. So I originally had France, Ireland, Scotland, England, Italy, Wales. I'm going to revise that and have England finishing third in the Six Nations, with Scotland being fourth. I think I just the noise coming out of Scotland at the moment, the fans. I may well be proven wrong. I had them down as a dark horse to start. I think losing Tuipulotu and Cummings is huge. So yeah, that's where I'm at the moment. That's where I think it's going to lay.
Yeah, I think I'm probably broadly in agreement, although not for the title, but I'm pipping Italy as my dark horses to get a shock result in this year. I think they'll beat Wales.
That's not a shock.
No, with apologies to my friends and family in Wales, this isn't to kick a dog while it's down. It's an unfortunate testament to where I think the Welsh squad is, particularly having not picked Maxwell in, which is criminal.
He's not bitter in the slightest, the Gloucester fan.
I'm not bitter because it's great for us. I just think it's daft. I mean, why would you not pick the top try scorer in the Premiership? It's just I just don't get it.
Yeah,
but anyway,
I agree.
I could go on and on. I think Italy will fancy their chances against Scotland, and I think they'll fancy the chances against France in Rome. They might not win that one. You know, I think France will probably prove too high quality for most teams. But they got the draw against them last year and should have won it. I think they will fancy having a real go at that. And I don't think they'll be too daunted by the task of playing England or even Ireland either. I think they'll give themselves a real crack in every game, assuming their squad holds together and they don't suffer too many injuries. I wouldn't discount Italy out of any match they play this year.
Yeah, I'm really keen to know the outcome of Menoncello's injury at the weekend because he's key.
Yes,
he's key for them.
Yeah, it'd be a real shame if he's not available, because they've already lost Lewis Liner, which is a blow for them. But I think one they can probably just about wear. I think England will be hoping to pull off a surprise result against France at home. I think they'll see that as somewhere they can really lay down a marker. Again, I think they might come up short. My guess is they will lose to Ireland and France, but I think might buck the trend that they've had in recent years against Scotland. I think with the injury Scotland have, they should have enough to overcome them. They'll probably continue to beat Italy, and I suspect Wales, even with the added incentive of upsetting England's day, I don't think Wales has got the quality to beat them either. And I'm sorry, so I think Wales are getting the wooden spoon with no wins.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything you've said there, Rory. Which doesn't happen very often, but let's roll with it. Moving on from international rugby, we've got a round of Premiership fixtures. We've been throwing lots of stuff at you in this podcast, so soak it up because we've got a round of fixtures this weekend before the Six Nations start in the Premiership. I'm going to tell you the fixtures, and you're going to tell me who's going to win and why.
Yeah. Okay.
Friday night, Harlequins versus Saints.
Yeah. So this season, this has been the sort of game that the Saints have not really capitalised on. But it's also the sort of game that Quins haven't really capitalised on. So it could end up being quite an interesting game, this one. Probably depends who gets released back to their clubs, but I think Saints are going to suffer more with that. So I'm going to back Quins to win this one at the Stoop. I've got a feeling that Northampton, unfortunately, aren't going to translate European form into Premiership form, and I think Saints will come up short here.
As much as I want to disagree with you, I can't. We are going to suffer with if England players aren't released. We're pretty bare bones on the wings as it is. I think we're losing Freeman and Slightholme. I'm not sure who's in the lineup to cover that, and then we're going to be losing the likes of Pollock. We're losing Langdon now. We're going to be pretty threadbare in squad selection, which we've already got a number of injuries to carry. So yeah, I think this will be probably one for Quins to win. I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think I will be. Gloucester versus Tigers.
The Ed Slater Cup.
The Ed Slater Cup.
Well, I'm going to play entirely to my biases here, and I'm going to back Gloucester to win this one. Partly because I think with squad selections, they'll have the stronger team available. I suspect Tigers will have lost a few more to that. I would imagine we'll probably still have Arthur Clarke back. I assume we'll pick all our Welsh players regardless.
Yeah, they don't need to be released.
Yeah, so my gut is that we win this one. Tigers will be desperate to bounce back from obviously a pretty terrible result last week, but I don't think they're going to be able to on this occasion. I think Gloucester are going to have enough to win this one and take the Slater Cup home.
Yeah, I agree. I've got Gloucester to win this one for the exact same reasons. I think Tigers will be licking their wounds still. They're going to be missing a lot of their headline players. Martin, Chesham, basically their engine room will be missing, along with Van Portfleet's now injured. Stewart, who's basically been their talisman this year. So I think the gaps they would need to fill are probably too big. So I got Gloucester for this one. Next, Exeter versus Saracens.
Yeah, so Saracens are going to be pretty threadbare. But I think their squad's strong enough to wear even quite big losses that they're going to have to the England squad. They're going to want to bounce back. They'll be really, really up for it this week. And we keep returning to this theme, and it feels like I'm digging out Chiefs at every opportunity, and that's because I am as a West Country rival. But I just don't see Chiefs winning this. I'm afraid, even with Sarries having a depleted squad, I just don't see it.
Well, I'm going to buck the trend. I'm backing Exeter to get the home win. I feel.
Oh, you're backing Exeter?
I'm backing Exeter to get the win. When Saracens have been missing Ben Earl, Tom Willis this year, they don't look a good team. I've been quite critical of them at times, that I think they are heavily reliant on their back row to deliver their front foot ball and to kind of make them competitive at the breakdown. I think you take out Ben Earl, you take out Tom Willis, you take out Jamie George, you take out Theo Dan, you take out Mara Itoje, I think they may struggle down at Sandy Park, because Exeter will not be losing that many at all, other than Henry Slade. So I'm backing.
I know. I agree with you, but the Exeter team isn't very good.
Okay, let's have a bit of romanticism in the sport. Let's dream that Exeter can pull off a victory against the mighty Saracens. And we don't have to agree on everything.
No. And that one I don't agree on. But I take your point, and you make a good point. But I just still think the Exeter squad's not good enough to do it.
Well, we shall find out next week. Sale versus Bath.
Yeah, I think that's a tough one because they're both losing a fair number of players. Bath do have the stronger overall squad, but I mean, this is a tough one to predict, really. Actually, with particularly getting Rafi Quirk called out, they're going to lose George Ford at Sale, lose the starting front row, the Curries. Yeah,
I hear you talking yourself into a Bath victory. Yeah, I hear you talking yourself into a Bath victory there.
Yeah, I hate to do it. I really don't like backing Bath, but on this occasion, I think logic's going to have to overrule on this one, and Bath are probably going to be too strong.
I had the same line of thought as you, and Sale are actually losing the most players to England squad out of all the teams in the Premiership.
Yeah,
and the players they're losing, as you just listed them, that they are their difference makers. So knowing Bath's depth that we've talked about in the past, like in their back row, I've gone for a Bath win. I don't think it's going to be an easy game for them to win, so I very well could be wrong, but I think Bath will win as well. And then to round off, sorry,
yeah, I was going to say, I think Sale will go for they'll have a sort of siege mentality this week. They'll go for try and do a back to the wall performance, but I think they'll come up short.
And then to round off the weekend, Bristol versus Newcastle.
Yeah, I think Bristol will win this. Unfortunately, Newcastle will turn up targeting this one because obviously Bristol actually aren't brilliant at home a lot of the time. They will have lost a few players to the England squad. They've obviously got their injury issues. But Newcastle have just lost Radwan, who's left immediately for Tigers. And we, I say we're unapologetically got soft spots for Newcastle. And I don't think it's an impossibility for them to go there and win this one. But my gut feel says Bristol got too much quality in the end.
Yeah, agreed. And Bristol, despite their form this season, aren't losing too many to international call-ups. Their core, they've got a number of kind of young Argentinian players. They've got the likes of Bernhard Jancy van Rensburg, Calavetti Revuvu. Can't rule them out.
Yeah, agreed.
But that sums up the Premiership Rugby fixtures and the look ahead. Okay, we're coming to the end of the podcast, which means one thing and one thing only: Q&A. As always, if you have any questions, we'll put out the call on our social medias in the week, but please do contact us on rucksmauls@outlook.com if you have any pressing questions. But the very first question I'm going to ask you, Rory, do any England players make a World 15 right now?
No, not at the moment. I think there's a handful of players who would be in the conversation. They'd be like honourable mentions would be for the likes of probably Marcus Smith, Alex Mitchell, Burnell at points last year, although he's probably got his work cut out to reach the same levels again. Marrow would be an obvious one who'd be in the conversation for one of the best locks in the world. But at the moment, we're actually probably a bit light on out and out, like standout world-class talent. A lot of like very good players with, at a very high level, and a lot of players that have got a really high ceiling. But in terms of out and out World 15 level players, we're probably not blessed with that at the moment, I don't think.
I'm at pains to agree with you, Rory. I can't see any that obviously make it into that World 15. And in our positions of strength, it just so happens there's some very good players in other countries at the moment.
It's no slight on boys not being in the World 15. You don't think that is a very minuscule percentage of players in the world to make in general. But at the moment we're probably not there. But I say there's some players there with high ceilings.
Yeah,
that could make that conversation in the near future. So that could change very quickly.
Yeah, the door isn't shut.
Question for you, David. This is very much your area of expertise. Are there any lesser known talents coming through the academies that we should be keeping an eye out for at the moment that we might start seeing break through into some first teams?
That's my dream question there, Rory. Depending on the time scale that we're looking at, there's a few players who are kind of on the fringes at the moment of some sides that I think, given extended periods of time in the first team, will become much more regular names. Top of my head, there's a number of them at Saracens at the moment. Nathan Michelot, Angus Hall, Ollie Hartley, to name a few out of probably a handful at Saracens at the moment who all got high ceilings, I think. Joe Jenkins at Bristol, I think, has got a high ceiling. Ben Waghorn, we're starting to see at Harlequins, starting to take his opportunity. Slightly lower age group, and purely from my Saints perspective, there's an under-18 called Eduardo Todaro, who's already playing for Italy under-20s. I had a conversation with someone recently about him, whose son played with him at Ipswich School. He said he's going to be absolutely mustard. Yeah, I've been told by other people who play age grade rugby, saying he's probably the best rugby player of his age group coming through the system at the moment in the backs. In the forward, there's a chap called George Marsh, who's at Leicester, who's a number 8, who's like a unit. And actually, on the wings, there's an under-20 knocking on the door, Noah Kalori, who's kind of making his way into social media already as being like the poster boy for being a winger. I can see it happening already. He looks like a star in the making. So those three are ones to look out for probably in the next 2 to 5 years, depending on how they develop. And those earlier names, I'd really like to see them within the next 12 months get some serious game time in the first teams.
Yeah. Ollie Hartley, obviously, and Ben Waghorn being young English 12s. That's a position that we'd really like to see them, some talent come through on. So yeah, definitely hope to see them oust the incumbents in that position soon.
If I'm honest, I could do a full 60-minute podcast on young talent coming through, but this was just a Q&A session at the end, so couldn't bless you all with all of my vast, ridiculous database of stats I have on these players, but for another day.
But another segment incoming.
Absolutely. But I think we're going to have to call it there, everyone. Episode 3 of the Rucks Mauls Oval Balls podcast drawing to a close. I can hear the sadness. I can hear the tears.
The gnashing of teeth. Have no fears. We'll be back again next week. But for now, myself and the President of the Democratic People's Republic of Front Rows, Rory, will draw us to a close. Just have to say thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. Remember to leave a review, follow, download, whatever you like to do. Find us on social media. We're there and thereabouts pretty much every single day. And we're more than happy to field any questions. Anything from you, Rory, before we close? May the sun never set on the DPRFR.
A fitting end. Right, thank you all for listening, and we'll be back soon.